In the small hours of the morning of the 18th of July 1925, an excursion train pulled into Sheffield Victoria Station just behind me. A railway employee went to oil between the carriages and he made a gruesome discovery. There was a mangled body of a man, aged about 30. But that was only to be the beginning of the drama on the line between Manchester and Sheffield that fateful morning.
At 4 o'clock in the morning, a signalman found something strange on the track here.
That's right, Penistone Good signal box, which is about 70 yards along the line there. 4 o'clock, it's the middle of summer, the first rays of daylight are shining through, and he noticed, as Dawn says, something right here under this bridge. It was a body of a man, believed to be in his 30s, with his head badly crushed. So there we have two badly damaged bodies found within 2 hours of each other. One at Sheffield Victoria Station down there, one right here at Penistone. Were these two deaths related? What was the connection between the two men who have been found? In this video we're going to dive in and find out. Yeah, the old maps show a signal box around this place. I've actually got a photograph of it from the 1980s, so thanks to Steve for letting us use that. They're the remnants of a couple of buildings here. If you look at the old maps, there's a signal box and two other structures. But we can still see some of the remains down by here with the cemetery over there.
So let's deal with each of those corpses in turn.
So the first corpse we're going to think about is the one found just behind us near the Penistone Goods signal box. So that corpse was taken onto Penistone Police Station just a couple of hundred yards away, and work began on trying to identify who that man was. We would like to have filmed this on a nice crisp sunny day, even though it's January, to replicate the fact it was midsummer. But what we have is a very dank end of January day, but we still got all the facts of the story.
So I guess the first question to ask is, who were these two men?
That's right, so there were post-mortems took place, and in the case of the body of the man found at Penistone, where we're still filming now, there was a card found on him, an unemployment insurance card that said Patrick Curry, 52 Norwood Road, Todmorden.
So what was he doing on a train going to where? Sheffield?
Well, Todmorden was a mill village out on the Yorkshire-Lancashire border, a few dozen miles from here. But when a journalist went round to 52 Norwood Road, Todmorden, they found it was a lodging house, but the owner of the lodging house had no knowledge of a Patrick Curry. But we'll come back to that later. When the body was examined, there were some really interesting features in the form of tattoos.
So what were they?
Well, this is really strange. So on each arm, at the top, by the shoulder, there was a lion. What would that signify?
Something to do with monarchy?
Possibly, because underneath, on the right arm, there was a tattoo of the King, King George V. Okay. And on the left arm, there was a tattoo of the Queen, Queen Mary. So what that suggests then? He loved the royal family?
Well, he had some kind of connection, or yes, some kind of liking of the royal family.
That came from his time in the military, because also there were tattoos of elephants on his forearm. Elephants? Was he from a circus?
Well, I did think when you said elephants, I was going to say why, but then I was thinking, did he serve abroad? Was he in Africa?
Well, there we go. So I've dug into the archives and found that on the 1921 census, Patrick Curry was serving in the military out in Burma and possibly the wider Indian subcontinent. Okay. There was also a sad tattoo on him. There was a gravestone with an inscription memorialising a brother called Jimmy.
Really?
And finally, on his chest, he'd been busy, hadn't he? Finally on his chest there was a bust of a woman.
And was that a relative of some kind?
We don't know, but we'll speculate as we find out more about the life of Patrick Curry, whose last breath took place at that bridge about 100 yards up the trail there. So I pieced together as much as I can about the life of Patrick Curry. We know he was born in Leigh, Lancashire in 1891, and he was the son of an Irish migrant labourer, also known as Patrick. In 1911, on the census returns, he was working as, I think he's pronounced a day teller. That's somebody who works on the colliery, but at the colliery surface, as did his father, and some of his brothers too. We know he was in the military in the First World War because we have a record that he was discharged in February 1918. In the same month, he married a lady called Margaret Robinson, who was also from Lee, Lancashire.
So could that have been the best?
It could well have been. So he's a married man. He's previously worked in coal mines. He's been in the army in the war, and then after the war, by 1921, he's in the army out in Burma. 4 years later, we know he's lying lifeless on the track down there. I may remember the reference to a tattoo that said to my dear brother Jimmy. His younger brother, James, or Jimmy, had died in 1912 at the age of 15. Patrick's body was formally identified at the inquest by his mother, Selina, who said she hadn't seen or heard of him for 4 or 5 years. There was no further mention of his wife, Margaret. The only mention I can find of her was in 1921. She was in hospital in Lee, Lancashire, whilst Patrick was out in Burma. So, to further investigate the mystery of how Patrick Curry's body came to be lying on the track at Penistone in the early hours of the morning of the 18th of July 1925, it might be worth looking at who the person was who was found on the buffers of the train when it pulled into Sheffield Victoria Station moments later. Yes, what of that second body found where I'm standing now at the site of the old Sheffield Victoria Station? Well, again, there was an unemployment insurance card found on his person, and it bore the inscription John Scaife Oldham. There were various attempts made to formally identify his body. There was a man called William Scaife, someone from Pudsey, and there was a photograph sent to an unnamed woman in Halifax. But I think because the body had been so badly mutilated by being dragged along on the buffers between Penistone and Sheffield Victoria, that no formal identification was able to take place. Although a later newspaper report did say that there had been identification of a John William Scaife, aged 36, from Hunslet, but it's all a little bit confusing as to who this man was. I think it's all based on circumstantial evidence. However, it's established that the second man was probably John Scaife, probably had been residing in Oldham, and may have been living in Hunslet. Anyhow, so there we have the two deaths. It was also stated at the inquest of the body found here that the man had on him a nickel-plated cigarette case, again with the inscription John Scaife Oldham, leading people to conclude that this man was called John Scaife and had at some point resided in the Lancashire town of Oldham. But the Sheffield jury at the inquest was unable to formally state how the man found here had met his death. So the next thing we're going to try and do is recreate the best possible version we've got from the facts of what happened to cause one man to be lying on the tracks on the line at Penistone Good signal box, and one man to be found on the buffers of a train here at Sheffield Victoria Station. Our story begins in the Cheshire town of Stalybridge just after midnight.
Final preparations are being made for an excursion train bound for Weymouth.
A dining car attendant by the name of Thomas Henry Taylor saw two men trying to enter the train from the trackside rather than the platform. When they noticed that Taylor had seen them, they went away. Taylor thought no more of the incident until news of the double tragedy emerged. It is believed that Patrick Curry and John Scaife clambered onto the outside of a carriage and clung to it as the train picked up steam towards the Woodhead Tunnel.
It is reckoned the train took 7 minutes to pass through the Woodhead Tunnel.
The Woodhead tunnels are known as the hell holes. It was bad enough being in a train passing through. It must have been indescribable, the smoke and the choking that Curry and Scaife experienced in that 7 minutes through those hell tunnels. A few minutes later, the train slowed as it approached the Stottercliffe railway bridge near the Penistone Good signal box. It was reckoned that both men clambered on top of a carriage just at the moment it was approaching the bridge. And as we can see, it's a different bridge shape to the one we have today. At the time, it was quite a low arch and only about 2 feet between the top of a carriage and where the brickwork was. And it is thought that Curry had his head smashed against the top of that bridge, the arch of that bridge, as the train was travelling about 40 miles an hour. The bridge was heightened in the 1950s during the electrification of the line, which is why it's higher today. Original photograph there from contemporary newspapers from which we did the colorised version you've just seen. It's further surmised that as Curry's head struck the bridge, his body knocked into Scaife, who was then pushed down onto the buses of the train, later to be found at Sheffield Victoria Station in a mangled state. So what were they doing on top of a train in the middle of the night? Well, the 1920s saw a lot of unemployment in Britain. After the First World War, many ex-soldiers, such as Curry, found themselves unemployed. There was a collapse in the mining industry through the 1920s. Remember, being employed in a mine at Lee, and lots of men travelled the country unemployed, looking for short-term work. They might have been in Todmorden looking for mill work. It could be speculated that as the train was travelling down to Weymouth in the middle of July, they were perhaps looking for seasonal work at a seaside resort. It was a time of terrible unemployment, terrible poverty for people who'd done their bit for king and country, and in Curry's example, actually having king and country tattooed on himself. But that's how they were treated. That's the situation we're in by the middle of the 1920s, hitching an illegal ride on board a train and facing those terrible deaths. The final piece of the jigsaw I wanted to find was the final resting place of these two unfortunate men, so I paid a visit initially to Burngrave Cemetery near where Sheffield Victoria Station stood. So on this dank January day, we're paying a visit to the Burngrave Cemetery in Sheffield to see if there is a grave to John Scaife, and if it's the same John Scaife as the one we've been investigating, and if so, we can solve one part of the mystery of the double death at Stottercliffe in Penistone. Absolutely amazing place. It's quite overwhelming, the number of stones, the inscriptions to the people of Sheffield who lived 150 years ago. Well, we're in the correct part of the cemetery where John Scaife was buried in July 1925. But as you can see, there's plenty of plots without a stone. I would imagine if he was a migrant, unemployed labourer, he's very unlikely to have a grand stone like the ones we can see around us. But somewhere here lies a John Scaife who died in Sheffield in July 1925. I wonder if we can get any closer to solving the riddle as to whether the man who was killed on the train between Penistone and Sheffield Victoria is buried here. Now, I thought a sense of being close to the grave of John Scaife was all I would find on this visit, but as I was leaving the cemetery, you might see a car there, I was really fortunate to meet a couple of volunteers from the Friends of Burngrave Cemetery who got up their database, and what do we see here? John Scaife found dead on the buffer of a train at Victoria Station. Mystery solved. That's the 29th of the 7th, isn't it?
There's 7 people in the graves, quite a lot. Yeah. Are there any children in there?
Yes.
Now, burials isn't something I've really looked into in detail in the past, but I was amazed to see that there were 7 people in the plot that John Scaife was buried in. Some of them children, going back as far as 1871 burials, as you can see there.
Because they take up a lot of room. That might be why.
3 years, 20 months, 19, 17 months.
So these had all died 1871, 1890. We also know that John Scaife had received a Christian burial service, and it was suggested to me that this might perhaps have been paid for by the railway company as a mark of respect for the man found dead on one of their trains at Victoria Station. And that would have taken place in this very chapel. Well, that is remarkable and serendipitous. This came across a lovely couple there, Steve and Christine from the Friends of Burngrave Cemetery. They managed to go onto the cemetery records and confirm that buried up there is a John Scaife who was found on the buffers of a railway train at Sheffield Victoria Station in 1925. And what of the body of Patrick Curry, killed at this very spot about 1:30 on the morning of the 18th of July 1925? Well, thanks to the Penistone Archive Group and Barnsley Bereavement Services, we have this record. We can see in Consecration Area 6, plot 416, we have a man of unknown years and a stillborn baby buried in the same plot. The man, Patrick Curry, and the baby, a stillborn of a Mrs. Fred Cherry. And you can see that Patrick, like his travelling companion John Scaife, had a Christian burial performed by the Reverend Carlton. Sadly, the stillborn baby did not. And where is plot 6, you may wonder? Well, you see the bridge there where Patrick Curry died? Right to the left there, literally within a stone's throw of the place where he met his death. He now resides in an unmarked grave in Stottercliffe Cemetery, Penistone. Many people pass by this bridge on a regular basis, including us on our walks and runs. So if you're one of those, all I would ask you to do is next time, spare a thought for poor Patrick Curry, John Scaife, and the circumstances that led them to their terrible deaths in 1925.
So we hope you'll join us next time, where every journey begins with a path to the past.